Hello, Psych 9 students, Professor Zeeb here again, and welcome to your next video lecture. This time we're going to talk about assisted reproduction. So if you remember in those past videos, we talked about how a lot of couples are struggling with infertility. In fact, a fair number of them, according to research. And we said that, thank goodness, there are solutions to those problems. So it turns out a lot of couples are seeking solutions and help to the problems that we mentioned before. In fact, you can go see certain specialists to help you with your reproduction needs. And so we're going to look at some of those strategies that people can use to help hopefully conceive a child as the goal. Now you have to be careful here. Some of these ones that we're going to talk about actually can be associated with problems. For example, some of them have been shown to be associated with low birth weight and preterm birth. Now remember, I'm not saying it causes that. We're saying that it's associated with that. And when I say that, that just basically means that the chance is higher than normal for a normal type conception. So don't be misled in sort of believing me that these cause preterm births and things like that. I'm just saying that the odds can go up and that they are more associated with it than, say, compared to a natural conception type situation. All right, let's get into some of these strategies here as I share my screen. Okay, so let's get into assisted reproduction. So the first one we're going to talk about is intrauterine insemination, IUI. And so basically what this means is we're inserting the sperm artificially, typically through a tube or some type of catheter could be used. And so there's some research connected to this one. They found that parents who conceive by these sort of means have a greater warmth towards their children compared to parents that conceive children naturally. So it makes you think, wow, okay, so if I do this process and I'm a parent that uses this, then I'm going to have a greater bond with my child. I think we have to be kind of careful there. So basically what that means is that, and this is probably generally true of almost any assisted reproduction to a certain extent, is that if parents are going to these routes to have children, that shows that they really, really want children. I mean, a lot of these are expensive. And by the way, insurance doesn't always cover them. So to me, it's speaking more to the fact that parents really want children and they're going to these extra extreme measures to do so compared to, say, if it happens naturally. Now, I'm not saying that parents who conceive naturally don't want their children and don't show warmth. I'm not saying that at all. But researchers sort of compared these populations and they found that it's higher with couples that use artificial insemination, for example. So I thought that was interesting. What's interesting about this one is that it could actually, the sperm that's being donated could actually be the prospective father or the biological father in that case, so the person that's in the picture, or it actually could be donor sperm. So it could be, I've heard of cases where it's a relative or, a relative of the father who can't conceive for some reason, that kind of thing. So in other words, it's interesting that it's not necessarily dad who's in the picture, but certainly could be depending on the case. Okay, so next we go to a really popular one, and that's in vitro fertilization. So this one is extremely popular. It's also very expensive, by the way. And it turns out that the timing is actually very critical with this particular one, okay? Essentially what we're saying with this one is that conception occurs, or fertilization occurs outside of the womb, and more specifically in a petri dish or something along those lines. That fetus would then be introduced into, or the embryo would be introduced into the woman with the hopes of a viable pregnancy and so on. So let's take a look at this one. A lot of different steps here. So number one, we would find that mom would take hormone therapy to stimulate egg production. Okay, so she's given shots for hormones to stimulate the ovaries to produce eggs. Those eggs are then retrieved from the ovary. So they use surgery to actually physically extract the eggs. Then a sperm sample is provided. Use your imagination how that would happen. So the prospective father, for example, would donate his sperm, and then the egg and sperm, as you see number 4 at the bottom, is combined to allow fertilization. So that conception actually happens in a petri dish. They then allow the embryo to grow, if you will. So basically the cells will multiply and become a morula and a ball of cells, if you would. In fact, there are reports of parents actually being able to see the young embryo through a microscope before it's actually implanted into mom. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's almost like this is the earliest picture you would ever have of your child to actually see the embryos before they're placed in the womb. Okay, those fertilized eggs are introduced into the uterus, where hopefully they will implant and then become a viable pregnancy, as we said. So you can see there's a lot of different steps in that process. So let's just go over those again, just to kind of make sure it's clear. So it would begin with hormone treatment to stimulate maturation of eggs. Ovulation timing is observed. The mature eggs are removed surgically. Eggs are then placed in a solution containing nutrients to keep those eggs healthy and well preserved, if you would. Capacitation occurs and the sperm is actually enabled after donation. Sperm is added to the solution. A fertilized egg or a zygote is created, and then that is placed in a new solution to nurture that zygote to become an embryo. Zygote is then placed inside the uterus at the proper time. So once again, there's a lot of detailed steps here, and it actually is pretty effective. I've seen some success rates up to 40 to 45%. Remember, that varies with the woman's age. So obviously the success rate is not the same for all. For example, older women may have more trouble with this process compared to, say, a younger mother. But overall, we find it's a very successful technique and obviously makes a lot of future parents very happy once it actually happens and they're able to become pregnant and so on. So it's a great thing. All right, so once again, the fertilized egg is implanted into the uterus as our last step there. All right, let's move on to our next one. I love this one. It's called GIFT, which I think is very appropriate. It's gamete intrafallopian transfer. This is where the sperm and or egg is placed in the fallopian tube, This one is somewhat outdated and it's not done as much. In vitro is really kind of the assisted reproduction strategy of choice. However, this was a classic one. I just love that acronym, however. I just think it's worth mentioning just basically for that. Okay, our next one is sperm and egg donation. So there's actually sperm banks, for example, that can be donated to prospective parents, for example. We know that eggs can be stored. In fact, some women are choosing to preserve their eggs, if you would, for many years. Maybe they're a young mother and they want to get their career settled, so they extract their eggs in the hope that they will be thawed out later and used to aid in pregnancy and so forth. So we have sperm and egg donation, which can happen. Next, we go to something called cryopreservation, which is basically freezing embryos for later use. So as it turns out, and by the way, this is often done with in vitro because they may take several eggs out and fertilize several of those eggs. And so as a parent, you have the choice of how many embryos you would like to insert through the in vitro process. So you could just say, I want all of them to increase my chances, which obviously ups the odds for things like multiples, as you probably know. But some women and parents are choosing to cryopreserve their embryo for future use. So I thought that was interesting how you can kind of freeze those as well as other means and things like that to preserve the embryo for later use. This next one has a very fancy description. It's intracytoplasmic sperm injection, which really kind of just says it all in the name. So here, this is where the sperm is injected into the egg. So for example, it may be a motility issue, which we mentioned before, where the sperm simply cannot make it to the point of conception or the location where that would typically happen. So this is where they physically inject the sperm into an egg. You imagine a microscopic needle and so forth to do that. And so another strategy for potential parents. All right. The last one we're going to talk about is surrogacy. And so this is where a woman agrees to carry a child for 9 months, possibly starting with the embryo. And then once the child is born, they then give that child to their parents. So as far as I understand this is sort of a legal contract that is signed. In fact, women are often paid to do this. In fact, I know people that do this for a living, if you can imagine that. And so basically they carry the child, and then once the child is born, they would then give it to the parents. But you can see how this could create problems. I mean, psychologically, you would have to become attached to that fetus during pregnancy, and then we would expect the mother to give up the child. How difficult that would be. You're carrying this living organism inside you, a child, right, a fetus at this point, and then being expected to give it up would be very, very difficult psychologically. So you can imagine how hard that would be to do for a human to give up a child that you've carried for that long and bonded and exchanged chemicals with and so forth. That's got to be tough. Obviously, I would never know, but I can imagine to a certain extent how difficult that would actually be. All right, guys. So as you can see, there are many different strategies, many different ways we can help people who are struggling with fertility. By no means is this list exhaustive. There are other strategies out there that I'm going to let you research on your own, very easy to find. But these are some of the more common ones that we talk about in the course. And I hope you understand them and I was clear in explaining those. So as always, guys, if you ever have emails, just make sure you email me and let me know, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So I hope you're enjoying the class. Keep on learning, and we will see you for the next lecture.